This guy. This. I'll tell you that I was eating breakfast this morning and he walked past the window outside the restaurant, and Steph and I stopped in mid-bite. I mean, we weren't biting each other. We were. We did that earlier. But I have been doing conventions for longer than I ought to have been. 28 years. This is the most extraordinary fucking thing I've ever seen. I didn't. You're pretty fucking extraordinary as well, but I didn't actually. Hell's Messiah, right? Yeah. If Jesus had opened the box. Wonderful. And I'll tell you, Clive would be completely tripped out by it too. So.
Do you want to do your microphones, or do you want to do?
I will.
Okay.
Then I don't have to shout at you all. Hi. Sorry. Fire away.
No.
But I had to start there.
I'm Jason Mortensen. I'm a contributing editor for Watch Play Read, and I also help organize this convention. And this is Doug Bradley. You all know him, right? But I'll let you introduce yourself.
I haven't got a clue who I am. Why are we here? Who is he? What's he talking about? Hi, YouTube.
So, I'm going to start at the beginning. I like the beginning. You grew up in Liverpool.
I was born at an early age.
So you grew up in Liverpool during the 50s and the 60s, during the British invasion. What was that like? What was it like being in such a small town that all of a sudden the whole world knew about?
I didn't think it was a small town.
Yeah.
It's not a small town. It's a fairly large city. Yeah. I was, oh God, maths. I was 8, just turning 9 when Love Me Do hit the charts. So I was just discovering that this thing called pop music existed at all, just as the Beatles and My City were about to become the epicenter of the universe. So it was a pretty extraordinary time to grow up. And I was, and also at the end of the 1950s, the great Bill Shankly had become the manager of my football club, Liverpool FC, who became dominant in the 60s and 70s. So it all seemed, I don't know, kind of divinely ordained, if I may. That my football club and my band, because I was obsessed with the Beatles, and still am, became the center of everything. And I remember in 1965, the Beatles came back to Liverpool for a civic reception, and I stood on Allerton Road for 2 hours just to see them go past in the back of a Rolls Royce. And it was like touching the hem of the garment to be that close to them. I met Ringo.
I'm sorry.
Don't say that. Don't say that. I won't hear a bad word against Ringo. He can be a bit of an asshole, but he was a hell of a good drummer. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. 1993, the MTV Music Video Awards were filming at UCLA, and I was doing publicity for the release of Hellraiser 3 and doing some publicity appearances in makeup and costume. And MTV had this idea for the Music Video Awards at the time that there were celebrities who weren't on the list and couldn't get in, and they pre-filmed those those segments and then screened them during the awards ceremony. So this was a couple of days before the awards ceremony, and the celebrities who couldn't get in, David Spader was the guy outside the tent saying, sorry, you're not on the list, you can't get in. It was Andrew Dice Clay, Roseanne, Ringo, and Pinhead. So I had already got the makeup and costume on. We'd put that on in the hotel in LA, in Beverly Hills, which was a hoot too, because I'm then making my way down in the elevator from the floor that my room was on to the ground floor. We're on our way down. It's just me and my makeup artist and the PR girl who was looking after all the publicity arrangements. And of course, halfway down, we stopped. And the elevator doors opened. And there's a regular businessman from Central Casting standing with his attaché case in his suit. The doors open and he's confronted by Pinhead. And he just kind of went and put his case down and said, it's all right. And on we went. And I put in my book that I always wondered what he did when he got home that night. Hey kids, guess who I met in the hotel? And then on our way to UCLA, we had to stop to get the contact lenses put in. So somewhere in Westwood Village, shoppers were surprised to see a limo glide up to the sidewalk, the door open, Pinhead get out and hoist his skirts up and skedaddle across the sidewalk into the optometrists and then back out again. So we got to UCLA and I stepped out and somebody came to greet us and said, we're so thrilled to have you here. And you know, Ringo's here today as well, which I did not. So I went kind of wobbly at the knees, and she said, we'll just come in here in the auditorium. Eric Clapton and Elton John are rehearsing at the moment. Okay. And I turn the corner, and Ringo is standing with his back to me talking to two guys, and one of the guys said something. Ringo turned around and went, "Hey, it's Pinhead." If you're ever nervous about meeting a celebrity, like some of you say to me sometimes, when you meet me and you get all quivery and you say all the stupid shit you promised you'd never say. Hi Ringo, I'm from Liverpool too. I'm a big fan of him. Yeah. But he was very cool. But I mean, yes, that was just me meeting Ringo. If it had been George or Paul, I don't know. And if I'd ever got close to saying I wouldn't have been able to speak to John at all. I would only have been able to say thank you and go, because he was always my Beatle, because he was the Beatle that my dad didn't like, because he was the dangerous one, you know, who thought the Beatles were bigger than Jesus, which he didn't. But anyway, we won't get into that. So sorry, that was a very long answer. But
no, it actually answered a couple of questions I had.
And of course, there was another fellow living in Liverpool at the time as well.
Yeah.
Called Clive Barker.
Yes.
Yes.
Before we get to that,
yeah.
like,
Sorry.
No,
Jesus.
like you touched on something that I am actually is a personal thing that I really want to know about, and that's the MTV. If you guys haven't seen the David Spade sketch with him, it's on YouTube, and he goes there to corrupt the souls of the people at the VMAs or the movie awards. And he says, I really don't have to try that hard. You know? But it's on YouTube. But I've been trying to find this because I remember this from when I was a kid. And I don't know if it was you or if they put someone in your makeup. Did you ever do MTV Spring Break?
Yes, I did.
You did! Thank God! Please tell us about doing MTV Spring Break.
There was a point where I was kind of becoming in-house with MTV. I was also a guest video jock for Halloween. They put me in a corner of a room in a hotel in New York somewhere, and built a little set just right in the corner, and it worked really well. It was with chains hanging down, and I was just reading intros. I remember, since the beginning of time, there have only been three certainties: life, death, and the Rolling Stones. But yes, Spring Break with Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. I said yes. I mean, it was a publicity thing again. So I was very reluctant to do publicity in makeup and costume, but they agreed to pay me. So I said okay. So we went down to Panama City in Florida, and it was a talent contest.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm off to one side with like a huge cauldron, which I'm stirring. And the idea was that the failures, the ones who got gonged off, got put in my cauldron. And so I would take their souls to hell. I had to ask for an awning to cover me, because foam latex does a very interesting thing if you stand in the sun. Because foam latex is full of little bubbles of air. You stand in the sun, you don't feel anything. And then the little bubbles of air heat up, and they heat up, and they heat up, and suddenly you're burning. And then you try to get in the shade, and it takes nearly half an hour for the little air bubbles to cool down. So I had to be standing in the shade, and so that was it. I stood there, and off to the side there's thongs down the beach as far as you could see, and this bizarre talent costume going on. I don't know.
I'm just glad I didn't imagine that.
It was not in my contract when I signed on to do Hellraiser.
So, you brought up meeting Clive in Liverpool, and can you tell us about what it was like meeting him? You met him in college, correct?
In high school. Equivalent of, yes, rehearsals for the school play.
Okay.
Pure and simple. I was aware of him before that. I mean, he was a fairly flamboyant figure around the school. He appeared in one of my lessons. I would be about 11 or 12 only, maybe. He was a couple of years older than me. He was making his way around the classrooms, leading a guy with a big fake hairy hand and a noose around his neck. He was going from classroom to classroom, publicizing his play. He was writing, starring in, directing, hand-drawing all the posters for, and doing the publicity for his own plays at high school. And the headmaster, William Pobjoy, would let Clive have free run of the school hall for a week to put the play on. I think because it was recognized in the school that this was a difficult pupil who barely attended the school in his first year because he was so scared of the place. Unbeknownst to his mother, he left home every morning but didn't go to school. And his English teacher, wonderful English teacher called Norman Russell, who had studied under J.R.R. Tolkien at Oxford and was now teaching at Quarry Bank in Liverpool. He had set homework, which was an original composition, which is a dangerous thing to ask Clive to do. And Clive had duly obliged. When Clive got it back, it was unmarked, and Norman had just written at the bottom in his perfect copperplate handwriting, see me. Those words that make every schoolboy and girl tremble. So Clive duly went out, and Norman said, yes, Clive, you'll observe I didn't mark this. Do you know why? Clive said, no, sir. And he said, because I'm not qualified to do it. And if it's okay with you and with your parents, I want to take time to talk to you. And he had seen Clive's talent as a writer. And I think that was Mr. Pobjoy's way of saying, I need to accommodate talent in the school. Now, same head teacher, about 10 years earlier, had given permission for another pupil at the school to start a skiffle band called the Quarrymen, John Lennon. So I always said that Pobjoy could rest his head easily on the pillow at night, knowing among other people, he had helped to launch the careers of John and Clive. So I got to know him in the school play. He was, as I say, a very larger-than-life, extraordinary character, very funny. It's a thing I think people don't necessarily understand about Clive. Yes, he's a sick fuck, we all know that. But he is very funny, and he has, and any one of you who's ever spent time in his company will know this. He has a great sense of the ridiculous, and the more ridiculous things are, the more he loves them. And I got involved in doing his own plays at school as well, and that kind of, set the ball rolling. After school and university, we formed an experimental theatre company in Liverpool. The Everyman Theatre used to give us free rein of the theatre when they were dark. And everything really grew from there.
Is that what led you to create Dogs?
Yes, we had a number of incarnations. We were the Hydra Theatre Company, multi-headed. And then we became the Theatre of the Imagination. Then we became a mime company because Clive decided that words were now redundant. Words were dead, so we became a mime company, and we called ourselves the Mute Pantomime Theatre, and we produced a tremendous mime comedy, full-length piece called A Clown's Sodom, which then became the Day of the Dog. Then Clive decided that he couldn't say what he needed to say in mime alone, and he needed words. So the Day of the Dog became this huge, sprawling play, which is now published, called Dog. And we became the Dog Company, which was in existence from the late 70s to around 1982, 1983, when we stopped. And a number of plays which are now published and have been independently produced, I think, over here. The History of the Devil, which I played the devil, and Frankenstein in Love, in which I played Dr. Frankenstein. Secret Life of Cartoons, in which I played Bugs Bunny. So the Dog Company came to an end, and I was working as an actor in provincial repertory theatre in England. Clive was starting to show me handwritten manuscripts of short stories. He said, I'm trying my hand at writing some short horror stories to see if I can make a bit of money. They were the stories that would become the books of blood, and I'm pretty certain that The Hellbound Heart would have been included in there as well. And then in 1985, he said to me, I'm trying to put together an independent British horror film. And there's a part in there I think you might be right for. I said, okay. And that was the first time that Hellraiser came into my life.
Now,
and it hasn't gone away since.
Now, before well, Hellraiser wasn't the first movie you guys made together. You guys made together Salome and the movie that eventually became Candyman, The Forgotten. Or, well, the story, no.
Well,
It's
The Forbidden.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as early as I knew Clive, he was messing around making movies. He and his mate Phil, he had a Super 8 camera. Actually, the first thing was an animated sword and sorcery fantasy film, owing a lot to the Lord of the Rings, called The Dark Tower, Stephen King. And yeah, I mean, Salome we made as teenagers in Aunt Taylor's auntie's florist's basement. We moved all the flowers in, and we had one handheld light and the Super 8 camera, which Clive operated as well as directed. But he couldn't close one eye. He used to stuff a handkerchief under his glasses so he could do that to film. So I mean, we were I was teenagers. I wasn't really making a film. And The Forbidden, wow, we moved on to 16mm for that. The Forbidden started life as a straightforward kind of Derek Jarman-esque adaptation of Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And it grew. This is what happens with Clive. You start there and it grows and it changes and it becomes something else, and other elements get added and it becomes something else, and the filming of The Forbidden went on for years. I mean, years. And was still never finished, and I still don't know what the fuck it's supposed to be about. And then the South Bank Show, which is an arts magazine program in the UK, they did a special on Clive, and they got hold of Salome and The Forbidden, and they showed clips from these in the program. Somebody watching it got very excited, so they got put out on DVD, for God's sake. And I found myself at the National Film Theatre in London introducing these films that we made in a florist's basement to be screened at the National Film Theatre. Crazy. But I mean, Hellraiser was my first movie, and although Clive had been tangentially involved in things like Rawhead Rex prior to Hellraiser, it was certainly his first film. Neither of us had a clue what we were doing.
There's an interesting element in The Forbidden that...
Are you referring to Clive's penis?
Well, I don't think there's a single person in this room that isn't. But no, there's the grid of pins with the light reflecting.
Yes.
Do you think, or do you know if that aesthetic ever lent to creating the Pinhead character?
So, again, entirely typical of the way that Clive would work. Where he for those of you not familiar with the film, and Clive's penis is prominently featured. When I say prominently, I mean prominently. He got a wooden board, and he put a grid pattern on it and got 6-inch nails, and at the intersection of each he banged a nail into the board. Don't ask me why, but part of the deal with The Forbidden was shooting it in negative to look not negative, if that makes any sense. We're shooting in black and white, so you film it in white and black. You set it up in white and black, film it in negative, so when you screen it, it's black and white, but it's kind of weird. Like doing, backward stuff in Twin Peaks, it's kind of the same thing with light. So if I can get this right in my head, he painted the board how does this work? He painted the board white and moved a light backwards and forwards in front of it, so the shadows of the pins moved across the board, black shadows on a white background. You shoot it in negative, so when you screen it, the background is black and the shadows are white. So it's white shadows traveling over the black background. I don't remember any other, and I think that was all that was going on with the nail board, was that Clive could play with the shadows and light and dark and black and white. Where are we? That was probably shot around 1976. 10 years later, he's anthropomorphizing. He's asking himself the question. That was really interesting, that thing with the nail. Now, what happens if that comes alive? What happens if that's somebody's face? Pinhead.
So, you've made quite a few Hellraiser movies, and
One or two.
I'm curious to know, what was your favorite to film compared to what is your favorite to watch?
Favorite to watch is the first movie. I never really had a bad experience on any of the films, honestly. I mean, Inferno, for me, kind of doesn't count because I only worked on the film for 2 days, and I don't like the movie. Bloodline, I like as a movie, but it was a difficult shoot. I go very often to Hellraiser 3. So it was a lot of fun. I made a lot of new friends. The first time I made a movie in the United States, first time I worked over here. And it was kind of a work hard, play hard movie, and I go there a lot. But I had a great time making the first 2 films as well, and the later movies too.
So Clive wrote a sequel to The Hellbound Heart. If this
Yes.
movie, if it was optioned to make this into a movie, a direct sequel, would you be willing to get back into the Pinhead makeup, or the Hell Priest, as he likes to call it? Would you be interested in doing that at this point in your career?
In a heartbeat. A long time ago, I was sitting in my back garden in London, talking to Clive on the phone, and he said to me, I mean, this is more than 10 years ago. I'm going to write an answering novella to The Hellbound Heart, which is going to feature Pinhead's ultimate demise. I said, cool, great, look forward to it. And that novella grew and grew and grew and grew, and the only 2 things I ever knew about it was that it was called The Scarlet Gospels, and it featured Joseph of Arimathea's dog. And I believe it grew until it was something like 26,000 words long. And then Mark Miller stepped in and said, you know, you're never going to get this published at this length, and edited it down to the novel that came out. I was very disappointed to see that Joseph of Arimathea's dog appeared to have disappeared somewhere along the way. But I love the Scarlet Gospels, and I love what Clive did with Pinhead, now called the Hell Priest, because he never had a name. He's anonymous in Hellbound, in the Hellbound Heart, anonymous in Hellraiser. The names Pinhead, Chatterer, Butterball were given to the characters by the special effects makeup crew. while they were working on the makeups for the first movie. They couldn't keep referring to lead Cenobite, Cenobite number 1, Cenobite number 2, you know. So they gave us nicknames, and they were the names they gave us, and they called the female Cenobite Deep Throat, which I think is why she continued to be credited as the female Cenobite. So because they were calling us all Pinhead, Butterball, and Chatterer, that's how we started to get called on set, even on Hellraiser. So by Hellbound Hard, everybody knew us by those names, to the extent that we were then in the Hellbound Heart credited as such. But of course, that's not his name, and as far as I'm concerned, in his head, he doesn't have a name. And if nobody ever called him Pinhead in the movies. He was once, I think, referred to as a Pinhead, but that's a very different thing. And if you called Pinhead after him, in fact, he wouldn't respond. I've always said, if I was Daniel Day-Lewis and the first AD said, "Can we have Pinhead to set?" nobody would have moved. Because Daniel Day-Lewis would have said, "I don't know who you're talking to." "Oh, well, Daniel, can we have you to set?" "I don't know who that is." Apparently on Lincoln, he would only answer to Mr. President. And on my left foot, he had to be carried around because he wouldn't walk. I'd have taken a crowbar to his knees. So there you go, Daniel. Now you really can't walk. You're on your own. Sort it out.
So this is another personal question. I've always wondered is what was it like filming Nightbreed? You had so many people and so much makeup, and I mean, you had, David Cronenberg, as the bad guy. You had so many amazing people on set. I imagine it was like, in my head, I like to imagine it was this nonstop party with just like people smelling horrible, like day-old makeup. Am I right?
Yes.
I want you to tell me that I'm right.
You're absolutely right. I know about the non-stop party. It was non-stop work. I don't remember anybody smelling particularly unpleasant. Nick Vince always smells very fragrant. It was chaos. Utter and absolute chaos some mornings, because they were putting so many actors through prosthetic makeup. It was ridiculous, absolutely nuts. And Bob Keene's crew did an absolutely magnificent job. The Cabal cut notwithstanding, it remains, as far as I'm concerned, an absolutely crying shame what was done with that movie, because it was an extraordinary film, and it was unlike any other movie. Not really a horror film, a dark fantasy romance. It's a story of a love affair between a girl and a dead guy. And Fox just screwed with the movie very badly. I didn't have any scenes with David. I met him briefly. He barely spoke. It was of course halfway through the movie, we came into work to discover that Chris Figg, who had produced Hellraiser and Hellbound and Nightbreed and had become Clive's working partner, and they were creating a company called Film Futures. They were getting an office at Pinewood. There was a slate of movies ready to go. We came into work one morning to discover that Chris had been sacked. I'm never quite clear exactly what went on. I think he had played a little bit fast and loose with the figures to get the budget in so that they could get the movie made. and he's not the first and won't be the last producer to play that game. Just don't get caught. And you end up with finance on set, which is a miserable experience. I don't know whether you know what that means, but in the normal course of events, you'll set up a scene to shoot. You call take one, and the director will say, okay, that was okay. Let's print that, but I want to go again because something with the lighting or camera move or something to change with the actors. And we'll do take two, and that doesn't work, so we'll do take three, and take three's almost there, print it for safety, but I want to go again, and we'll do take four. Now, if you have finance on the set and you do take one, and the director says, okay, cut, okay, yeah, that's not bad, print that, but I want to go again, finance will say, you said print that. So you're happy with that take? Well, it's okay, but you want it printed, so you're okay with it. Well, yes, but okay, move on. And that's it. The money men call the shots. That happened again on Bloodline, which was, and it's no way to work. It's horrible. It's horrible, miserable. But anyway. And then, of course, they just messed about with the whole film. They couldn't get. Clive was hot from Hellraiser. They wanted a horror film, come hell or high water. So they moved Decker. I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. They moved Decker to the center of the story. He's not supposed to be there. He's an extraordinary kickstart to the plot, but they moved him to the middle of the story because they wanted to market it as a slasher. It's never meant to be. It's just a stupid decision. They couldn't get the idea that the monsters were the good guys and basically wanted to be left alone to live in peace like freaks under the cemetery, and it was the normal folks with the shotguns up on the surface who were the weirdos. They couldn't get that idea, so they had to make the breed nastier and more aggressive. And I lost my voice and acquired a German accent. I got my voice back without a German accent for the Cabal cut, which was good. So yeah, an extraordinary film that got badly compromised.
We have a few minutes left, and if it's okay, I'd like to open up the questions to the audience.
Hellraiser 3 filmed a music video with Lemmy. How was that? Any details you'd like to share?
Sure. So we shot it in, it's Ozzy Osbourne's song. Originally, Hellraiser 3 was supposed to have a full rock soundtrack, but they changed their mind at the last minute that they wanted a symphonic score. Hellraiser was the only song that survived. I was in fact contacted by a guy who was putting together a Lollapalooza Hellraiser tour for all the bands that would be involved in Hellraiser 3, and wanted me to go on tour with it to MC it. So Ozzy had written the song, didn't want to record it for some reason, gave it to Lemmy. Lemmy was asked if he would do the music video for it with Pinhead, and Lemmy said yes if Clive Barker directs it. So Clive agreed to do that. So we were filming in a condemned, one of the wonderful old movie theaters in downtown LA, now condemned. I arrive again in the limo, 10 o'clock in the morning. I step out of the limo, and there's Mr. Killmister already standing on the sidewalk having a cigarette, because we weren't allowed to smoke inside the building. So I started my working day. I smoked then, standing on the sidewalk in downtown LA having a ciggy with Lemmy, who at 10 o'clock in the morning had a certain aroma around him. When we played the scene across the card table, where we play the card game and he wins because the ace of spades turns up, of course, there was a empty decanter on the table with a couple of goblets next to it, just as kind of I guess, Gothic props. And Lemmy and I were chatting. He's very funny, very smart. We shared a passion for classic British comedy, Monty Python, but also Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, The Goons, classic British radio comedy, of which Lemmy had perfect recall. So Pinhead and Lemmy sat across the card table trading British comedy. All the time he's casting an eye on this decanter. Summons one of his people, has a word, the decanter is removed, we carry on chatting. A few minutes later the decanter returns, now filled with amber liquid, which he proceeded to drink like you and I might drink orange juice. While we shot the scene, while the dark Pope of Hell demurely sipped his Evian water on the other side of the table. So it was a memorable day. It was a memorable day. That was what, around 94, 95, I think, something like that.
I think we got time for one more question.
I really enjoyed was it Hellraiser 2 and 3 when you got to appear as what you were before the Hell Priest. I just was curious how you felt about that inclusion of that into the storyline, whether you felt that furthered the plot or gave you some sort of compassion or something to the character.
I have an extra part to that. I noticed that your demeanor is way different when you're playing Pinhead and when you're playing the Captain, and your voice is very different. Is that all you, or do they do any sound adjustment?
Oh, okay.
So his question.
Well, okay. Well, the answer to the I don't mean this to sound arrogant, but the answer to the first part of your question is it's called acting. And I don't mean that sounds like I'm putting you down, but no, I mean they're very different characters.
Yes.
Yeah. Duh. One's a human being and one isn't, and so forth, or one used to be. So when we were doing Hellraiser, I knew that Pinhead had been human once. I knew that from talking to Clive, and it was fairly obvious from looking at him. I didn't know when, and I didn't know who. Whether it was last week, a month ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or who that person had been, I didn't know. I was okay with that because I've said that when I got the makeup on for the first time for the screen test, I sat in front of the mirror and let these feelings and impressions come off the mirror to me to find out who this guy is. Because all the preparation in the world has got nothing on putting your frock on, as actors call it. And in my case, getting the makeup on and looking in the mirror, and I've gone, and he's looking back at me. So it's a process of, okay, hi. Who are you? And among lots of feelings, I had a sense of melancholy, sadness about him. And I tied that to his lost humanity, to a memory, a kind of unconscious memory of a humanity that he'd lost, which also made sense to me as to why he's so damn interested in people. He doesn't just turn up and rip you to bits. When you meet him, he wants to have a good conversation first. He wants to tease you out and find the dark corners of your soul, for want of a better word. So when we came to Hellbound and the backstory was introduced, it made perfect sense. It made even better sense because he was located as a captain in the English army at the beginning of Hellbound. In fact, he's in India, so he would have been dealing with the Indian mutiny in the early 1920s, which Pete expanded in Hellraiser 3 to make him a survivor of the First World War. the rank of captain in the British Army in the First World War had the shortest lifespan of any rank. In some cases, less than 48 hours from going over to France and being dead. What made even greater sense of it for me was in the approach to making Hellraiser 3. There was a documentary about the Battle of the Somme, 1915 or 16 in the First World War, which is the blackest day in British military history. 60,000 dead and wounded in the first 24 hours of a battle that went on for months and resulted in the deaths of 500,000 for the acquisition of less than half a mile of land. What happened on the first day of the Battle of the Somme was the German trenches, Allied trenches, no man's land. This is before you guys got involved. You try and take all the glory for the First World War. You rolled up with about 10 minutes on the clock, you know, scored a basket and said, "Hey, we won!" So there has been aerial bombardment going on for days from the British side to the German trenches. So the British soldiers were told, this has all been taken out. But it hadn't, because the Germans were very good at listening. They tunneled under no man's land and they listened. They knew what was going on. Plus the ordnance was falling short in no man's land, or it was overshooting. So the British soldiers were told that there would be no enemy fire. So what they would do is they would keep the aerial bombardment going until just before dawn. Then it would stop. And the soldiers came out of the trenches. And they were to walk across the trenches in battle formation. So you have barbed wire all the way along here with gaps in the barbed wire. You come up over the top in single file through the gaps in the barbed wire to form battle formation. Some of them went across kicking footballs. You went across in your battalions, and they were going to walk across no man's land, and they were told the German trenches would be empty when they got there. The German machine gunners were waiting, and there's gaps in the barbed wire, and one soldier appears, bump, one soldier appears, bump, one soldier appears, bump. And that was what happened. And this very old guy talked about roll call the following morning. These battalions were local, very, very local to areas in the UK. They all knew each other. There were brothers in the same battalion and people who lived down the road from each other. And he described this process of the roll call the next morning. Smith, silence. Johnson, silence. Wells, silence. Anderson, present. Jones, silence. And the decimation across the battalions. And he said, I cheated. I shouldn't be alive. I should be with them. I should be dead. I should have been under the ground in Flanders. I shouldn't be here. And I thought, fuck, that's it. That's Elliot Spencer. That's why the box. That's why he wanted to get to where he ended up. So. Very quickly, the voice. When after we did Hellraiser, I was sent to Delaney Studios in Soho in London to re-record all my lines because they needed them clean to treat them. I mean, I always say I'm good, but not that good. I don't know what exactly they did to make me sound as I did in the first movie. It always seemed to me like they maybe multi-tracked it slightly, like they maybe dropped the pitch a little bit, maybe slowed it down slightly. Hellbound. I get sent to Delaney Studios in Soho. I go in, it's the same guys, and when I walked in, they said, "Oh, hi, Doug. You know, we wished we'd known there was going to be a sequel because we'd have taken notes." We have no idea what it is we did to make you sound the way you did. So they reinvented it from scratch. Now, Hellraiser 3, shot in North Carolina, reshoots in LA, and post-production in LA. I go into the studio to re-record my lines. I walk in, and they say, "Oh, hi, Doug. Now, what is it we need to do to make you sound like Pinhead?" I'm just a schmuck who flaps his legs. I'm not the sound engineer. Unless you can get some production notes out of Pinewood, I can't help you. So the answer to that question is it has been reinvented for every single film. The last 2 movies were shot in Bucharest, Romania, so God help us.